The last 2 years have taught us a lot of things about our economy because of the impact of the global pandemic on our economy. It looks like the unity that countries exhibited when it comes to fighting the virus is about to change because we would be witnessing a new Cold War that could crash the economy, especially the United States economy, which will then accelerate the economic crisis that the US is already facing as a result of the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic showed us that the world can unite toward a common cause, which was to get rid of the virus. But when it comes to the global economy, or when you consider the global system as a whole, it was never unified under a single umbrella, because different countries have different ideologies, which is why they tend to pick sides when it comes to a global issue, especially a political one. It's common for global powers to rise and fall because there will be a country that will be strong enough to question the dominance of a global power to seize the opportunity to fill gaps. When we talk about superpowers, the United States and Russia would be the two superpowers that would come to your mind, and the Cold War between both of these countries. The very first Cold War started right after the end of the Second World War. There was a lot going on behind the scenes between Russia and the United States. By 1948, the United States had already launched the Marshall Plan to deliver economic support to countries fighting off the influence of communism, and that was when the world was divided into two spheres of influence. The first was backed by the communist Russia, and the other one was backed by capitalist America. Fast forwarding to the modern day, ever since the Ukraine invasion began, China declared a defective policy of neutrality. China previously sought a greater alliance with the Putin regime based on the conflict with the United States and Western power in general. Surprisingly, China chose to abstain from both the United Nations Security Council resolution vote to end the Ukrainian crisis and the UN General Assembly vote condemning Moscow's action. Even then, China described its relationship with Russia as ironclad. Prior to this, almost everybody thought that China would openly support Russia or might act as a mediator. But it looks like that did not happen. This is because China now has got a reputation to maintain all over the world, especially in the Western countries, because several Chinese software and hardware are getting banned by the government because of China's political policies. Keep in mind that China happens to be the world's production hub, so it makes a lot of sense for China to probably stay away to avoid Western sanctions, which could have a negative impact on the Chinese economy. The US was mostly concerned about China offering an economic or military lifeline to Russia because that would make the sanctions that the US had imposed on Russia less effective. If you look at the economic situation of China, China's economy is much more stable than Russia's. But because of China's ambitious economic expansion plans that are based on a globalized economy, China is playing it safe. The Chinese interest is all about protecting the economy from a volatile period induced by the COVID-19 pandemic, along with several supply chain issues. Putting China aside, the US economy is hit really badly with inflation due to the rise in gas prices. In response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States, along with its allies, tried to implement an upgraded version of the Cold War strategy of containment, which is all about countermeasures by imposing sanctions to deter Vladimir Putin from further aggression. Countries like China and India stayed somewhat neutral on the entire situation. The United States and its allies blocked most Russian banks from doing business in the West to counter Putin's actions on Ukraine. But this time the story is different because, unlike the very first Cold War, this time the United States is very vulnerable to Russian economic retaliation, and that's very evident with the gas prices because Putin could now reduce Russia's exports of natural gas, which happens to be Europe's main sources of heating fuel. Putin is also capable of launching cyber attacks on the United States and its allies. Vladimir Putin also stated that he would be using nuclear weapons if he really wanted to, and he won't hesitate to do it. However, the current situation of the economy is a result of American leaders not being able to imagine a post-oil economy. The international markets still depend on Russia's energy sources, and that would create a lot of problems across the world, and not just in the United States, at least for those countries that depend on Russia and are an ally of the United States. The Ukraine crisis clearly showed us that the United States has its limits, and it has always been that way. The impact of the Cold War 2.0 can be felt in so many ways on the US economy, all the way from the prices that people pay for gasoline to everyday commodities. Let's start with the higher energy costs, which happen to be by far the most talked about effects of the Ukraine-Russia conflict on the United States' economy. The higher gas prices would take away a huge amount of money from a consumer's monthly or annual budget. The higher energy prices will also result in inflation, which is already at the highest level in about 40 years in the United States. If oil prices continue to increase further, the energy costs for US households could rise about $750 on average this year compared to last year. This will result in people having very little money to spend on other goods and services. The lower income group will have to spend a lot of money on gasoline if they want to get from point A to point B, and this will dampen consumer spending and it will hurt the economy in a negative way. The other issue would be the trade and supply chain disruptions. Already, the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in several supply chain disruptions, and the Russia-Ukraine conflict could make things worse. We're already dealing with a semiconductor shortage, and the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict will just make things worse. If you think it's just all about fuel prices, well, Russia and Ukraine combined make up nearly 30% of the world's wheat exports, according to Capital Economics, and as a result, the prices of products like wheat and corn have seen a massive surge in their prices ever since the conflict began. Wheat and corn are staple foods for so many people. So if you're somebody who is heavily affected by the war, then the best way, especially for the young people, to protect their assets during such a time would be to manage your fuel costs efficiently by taking public transport, if that is available, and you also need to invest in assets for the long term with the money that you already have. The United States, after the demise of the Soviet Union, might have achieved global dominance for a brief moment of time, but now that title may slowly fade once countries like China and India enter the picture, and that is a huge threat to the United States. The United States showed us that a superpower is never infallible or omnipotent, which is why superpowers like the United States should be picking their battles properly while engaging in so many tough choices, just like every other country out there, especially when it comes to dealing with a nuclear power like Russia. And you know, Russia happens to be a very influential country in the global economy. The US clearly failed to understand its shortcomings, and that might be the reason why the economy could crash moving forward. If the situation continues, then this wouldn't be the best place to be for any country out there, let alone the United States. The very first Cold War was a very costly affair for the United States and its allies, and also for the Soviet Union. But this time, the superpowers need to reduce the risk of this Cold War becoming more costlier than the very first one. So, if you have been to a gas station recently, you already know the impacts of the Ukraine-Russia conflict on the global economy. The war in Ukraine, along with the further destabilization in Europe, has completely turned the global markets upside down. This is because of the fact that Russia is a superpower and the country plays a predominant role in a number of global commodity markets. This is a catastrophe for the world economy, and it could increase global inflation even higher than what it is today. The poor countries will continue to suffer because of this ongoing conflict. Experts claim that it's unlikely to trigger a global financial recession in the United States as the economic growth has been strong over the past year, but it will be affecting the prices of so many commodities and the general confidence of the economy. In the end, it doesn't matter how Putin's ambitious plans to invade Ukraine ended. It will be a turning point in history that will mark the end of a 30-year period of peace in Europe. With the Ukraine-Russia conflict, the hostile environment is back and the US needs to take precautionary measures to control inflation. Did you find this video informative or helpful? Let us know in the comment section below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on my future videos. Don't forget to like and share.